Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. That changes depending upon where you are watching and when you are watching, but the moral of the story is hello. And thank you for joining me for the February recording of Miss Dr. Kenya. Um, we are going to do something different today, and I feel like I've said that 2 or 3 times in the past, but today we are also doing something different. We are going to stop and pause our conversations with the Youth Council just to check in with families. We are at the point of the school year where most families have received at least 2 report cards. And at this particular point, if you have not seen any improvement in your students' work, if you have not seen any improvement in your students' mood, most families start to worry right about now. So I wanted to stop and pause and check in with you. Number one, to see where you are. And number two, to offer you some help, some support, some guidance to make sure that you are working with your school to make sure that your student gets either the academic, the social, emotional support that they need. And one student may need all of those things, right? And it's okay. So let's stop and let's talk about it. Over the past couple of months, we have been talking about the different struggles that children and youth have. We started off talking about creating a healthy start to the school year and why returning to school can be anxiety provoking for a lot of students. We then just talked about anxiety in general, what it is, what it looks like. And we did that because it's very common among children. We talked about bullying, right? And how that can make the school experience very unpleasant for students, especially students in middle school. They struggle the most. And then we had a conversation, a special conversation with Black men, because when we look at the numbers as it relates to depression, Black men, Black males are really, really having a hard time. And anxiety and depression are things that are really common among children and youth and what we see more often than not. But they are not the only things that can impact a student's learning. But those are the two most popular disorders that definitely have an impact on student learning. Okay, so let's take a deeper dive. Let me start with why I care. I am, as some of you know, both a doctor of clinical psychology and a social worker. Let me tell you why that's important. I think, as a doctor of clinical psychology, you guys kind of understand why I would be interested in learning, because that's kind of what psychologists do, what the level of expertise is, right? So if you want to know how you're functioning cognitively, more likely than not, you're going to go to a psychologist to have a psychological assessment to figure out how am I functioning cognitively. Another way of saying that is like, what's my IQ? How do I learn? How is my memory? How am I able to put things together? Like I feel like I'm struggling, something is off, but I can't really put my hand on that thing. So you go to a psychologist to do a psychological assessment to figure it out, right? So I feel like that's obvious. As a social worker though, I don't know if it is quite as obvious why I would be interested in student achievement, student learning, students in school as a social worker. So let me answer that question. Social workers are experts in environment. In particular, there is a theory in social work called person and environment. To make a long story short, this theory really focuses on the fact that our environment has an impact on us. That doesn't seem like it's very radical, like it makes sense. Your family has an impact on you. Your community has an impact on you. Your relationships have an impact on you. And the time in which you are born has an impact on you, right? So there's a lot of conversation around, millennials and Gen Z and Gen X and how they show up differently. And they show up differently simply by virtue of what decade they were born, right? So all of these things are a part of our environment, and our environment has a definite, significant impact on us. Just think about it from your own experiences. When you are thriving, when you feel like you are your best self, what's happening around you, the people who are around you, where you are, impact how you think about yourself and how you feel about yourself. So if you are around people who support you, in an environment that feels good to you, where you feel like you can show up as your authentic self and not apologize, not try to be fake, not try to, bend or show up differently to fit in, chances are you are feeling good about yourself. But if you are in an environment where people do not accept you just the way that you are, chances are you are questioning yourself. You're trying to shrink to fit in, to make other people um, feel comfortable around you. And you go from thriving really to just hoping that people will tolerate you. And that is a terrible feeling. Well, when it comes to children and youth, where do they spend most of their time? School. Our children and our youth spend more time in school than they do at home, especially if they're participating in school-based extracurricular activities, if they're doing things before and after school, if they're in programs after school, if they are doing sports, if they're in a debate team, um, they're spending over half of their day at school. So it's important that we really stop and look at schools, especially as it relates to our children and youth, because school is where they are, okay? So now let's talk about what's happening in schools. There are all sorts of scenarios of how students are functioning in schools. We have students who are doing well academically. They have very good grades. They're learning. They're improving. They're gaining new cognitive skills. Um, they have a thriving friend group. They feel like they belong. They have no complaints. Like this is the gold standard. This is what we are all shooting for with our children. But most kids are not showing up that way. You have students who are doing well academically, but may not necessarily feel connected to the peers that are in their school building. Yet, right, going back to person and environment, if their community is showing up strong, if their family supports them, if they are involved in extracurricular activities in the community, like a Boys and Girls Club or something along those lines, those students are still thriving because they still have a sense of connectedness. That social connectedness is not with their school-based peers, but they still have it. Then you have students who um, are doing okay academically, but they're still thriving socially and emotionally. They are doing well in sports. They have friends. They feel good about themselves. You have students who are struggling both academically, struggling social emotionally. You have students who may be failing in grades, right? But are still making academic gains, all the way to the student who is so overwhelmed by what is happening in the community that he, she, they barely attend school. Yet, when they do show up, they're strong. They do well. They can get it done. They are likely the most intelligent student in your school building. And there are so many other scenarios. Our students show up in so many different ways in schools. So why is that important for us to stop and take the time out and to acknowledge? Well, I'm having this conversation with you and I'm talking about how our students show up in schools and the different things that may impact them, because I want you to understand as a parent or a caring adult that our expectation is that for those students who I described earlier, who may not be thriving either academically, social, emotionally, our expectation is that the school will somehow naturally be able to, number one, identify that that particular student is struggling and provide help. And I have to be honest with you, that's an unrealistic expectation. It's also an unfair expectation. Schools have hundreds of students. Some schools, especially high schools, may have 2 or 3,000, 1,500. And for us as caring adults, as parents, to expect that the school will naturally, automatically be able to identify when our student has been having a bad day, when our student has been stuck, right? Either, academically, they are experiencing some anxiety, they're starting to show signs of depression. For that to just happen magically without any intervention, I think that's unfair and it's unrealistic. Schools cannot identify every student that needs help because they only have a fraction of a student's story. They only know the student that walks through that door. And that may not be the same student at home. It may not be the same student in the community. They only know what they see at school. So if you, as a parent, a caring adult, have concerns about that student outside of the school building or inside of the school building, you got to partner with your school to let them know. They will not know automatically. But that's okay because schools welcome partnership with caring adults. Like they recognize that they are not able to assess and identify and support every student because they cannot catch everything. But they are happy to work with you and to make sure that your student is doing well. Right now, schools only focus on things that are specific to schools. Sometimes the help that they need is help that must be provided in the community. It's not support that schools need, that schools provide. Schools still have some supports in place that they are willing to offer your student to be helpful to you, right? So it's important that we partner with schools to make sure that our students are getting the help that they need when we recognize that they need them. How do schools support students? Okay, so I've written an ebook. You can access the ebook on our website, which is www.wellnessandeducation.org. And there you can find the free ebook and download it, right? And that ebook goes into detail about the conversation that we're having now, right? So if you want a more detailed um, accounting of how to do this, please go online, download the ebook, and again, it's free to you. There's no charge to you. But generally speaking, schools provide support based upon the level of need. Okay, so let me break that down. Level of need. There are supports that are available to all students, right? So all students get academic programming. All students are exposed to some level of like social emotional support. And what this looks like varies based upon whether your student is in elementary school, middle school, or high school. But generally speaking, this looks like an incentive-based program a rewards-based program, probably where, you know, if they collect so many points, they can go to the school store and buy something. This looks like schools publicly acknowledging students' achievements. This can be posting of grades. This can be rewarding the student for citizenship, like all of the things, right? But that looks different depending upon what school you go to. There are some schools who actually stop and have mindful moments throughout the week, more likely than not in their morning announcements. Some schools some schools offer wellness Wednesdays, like when they're intentional about doing some type of mental health activity. So it looks different depending upon what school and school system your student is a part of, but all schools have general programming. And that works for a good portion of schools. I'm going to say about 75% of students benefit from that general programming and don't need much more, right? But there are still some who need a little bit of extra help. No problem. Schools support them as well. More often than not, this looks like a small group type of intervention. So this is a student that is getting pulled out by their teacher to work with a small group of students, maybe 8 or 10 of students on math, on different aspects of reading, right? They just pull them out to support them in a smaller group. This looks like lunch bunch groups, social support groups, groups for children of divorced parents. So all of the things that a student may be dealing with at school, and they need a little bit of extra help because the general programming isn't meeting that need. Most schools offer something. In high school, this may look like an anger management course or something along those lines, right? But all schools should have it. And this helps a good portion more. I'm going to say about 15 to 20% more. But there is still a small portion of students who need individualized help. And again, no matter where your student is on this particular spectrum, it's okay. So I want you to know, as a parent, as a caring adult, there's no shame in any of this, right? All of us are nuanced, and all of us have specific needs at various times, depending upon what's going on in our life. And our children and youth are no different. So if your child needs help, don't be embarrassed to say, hey, my child is struggling in this particular thing and we need help. Again, schools are there to support you. So when we're talking about individualized help, this help more often than not is provided and mapped out in a plan, a 504 plan, which provides accommodations and gives your student access to specialized services like one-on-one time with the school counselor, school social worker, school psychologist, whoever in your student's building offers that individual counseling, and or an IEP. So a student who has an IEP gets all of the things in the 504 plan and gets individualized instruction. Okay? But with all of these things, it starts with, or your student gaining access to any of these things starts with a conversation. It starts with you saying, hey, I've noticed this particular thing with my student. I've noticed it for a while. I've done what I know to do, but I think my student needs more help. How can we partner to support this particular student? In order to get that help, there is somebody in your student's building that is over specialized instruction, okay? So you can bring it to the attention of that person who is normally an administrator, or you can simply have a conversation with your student's educator in particular, right? Whoever it is, start with that particular conversation and begin the process, okay? So you do not go straight from one level to the next level. Most schools titrate up. What that means is they start with the least level of intervention because you don't want to overwhelm a student or yourself. And then they increase it based upon the level of the student's need, right? So it's very unlikely that you're going to go from whole group to an IEP. There are steps in between there, but you have to start in order to figure out in partnership with the school what your student needs. I also think it's important to call out that as your student increases from whole school, small group, and individualized education, your student still receives the things at the lower levels. So everything that I get at the whole school level, I still get that and I participate in the small group. Does that make sense? Everything that we get, that the whole school gets, I get, and I still get my individualized support. And I may also be participating in some small groups. So I don't want you to think that if my student gets this, then they won't get that. That's not true. As a student increases in their level of needs, they continue to get the things at the lower level and the things that they need now to meet them where they're at. Again, we are having this conversation because we're at the point of the year where families start to get worried because they either aren't seeing any academic growth, their students' mood has changed in some way or another, and they're concerned, okay? Not a problem. The school is there to support your student and to partner with you to make sure that your student has the supports that he, she, they need. Again, if you want to have a deeper level of understanding on how to do this, go to our website, www.wellnessandeducation.org, and read the ebook that I authored called Help is Here, Accessing School-Based Supports. Okay? And as you read it, you can probably better identify what your student needs. Again, we're having a general conversation now, but in the book, I break this down as it relates to what does whole school programming look like by grade, elementary school, middle school, and high school, and then in the different domains. And when I say domains, what I'm saying is every school has programming specific to academics, social emotional, physical, so on and so forth. What does that look like? So that you know when you go to your student's school, okay, what should I expect to see when we're talking about these supports? Like, what does it look like at a very practical level? What can I see? What's tangible to me? How do I measure it? Because here's the thing. Once we have a plan in place to support our students, we have to make sure that we're following the plan. That's the only way we will know if our student is making improvement. And that plan cannot just be the report card. Okay? So when you start to talk about increasing the level of support that your student receives, you also should be getting more information and more feedback from the school. You need to be checking in with your student's school according to the plan. You need to have benchmarks, things that you can measure to determine how we will all know if the student is making progress. It should not just be based upon what I think. I should be able, for example, I'm going to use a mental health example because I'm a mental health expert and that's what I know, right? So if I have a student who I think is struggling with anxiety, I may use the Beck anxiety scale as my measure to determine if there has been growth, right? I would expect that my student would start off at the area of concern or at the clinical. And as I begin to deliver my interventions, whether that's a small group intervention or one-on-one therapy, I am expecting my student scores on that particular assessment to decrease, right? For the student to be able to better manage his or her mood. So that's one way that I would suggest that you make sure when you're doing what I'm describing is progress monitoring, that you be very clear on how we are measuring change, how we are measuring improvement. Okay? So I hope this conversation was helpful for you. I would really, really, really appreciate if you could just share some information in the comments and let me know where you need to have more information, where you're stuck, right? What you need to lean in on. You can also reach out to my business, Kaleidoscope Wellness and Education Group. And if you need um actual support, if you need someone to be with you and lead you to and guide you through the process, no problem. We got your back. Just give us a call at 301-202-4353. You can go to the website, download the ebook if you kind of want to start the process on your own. At the end of the day, our goal is simply to make sure that our students are holistically well. And if you need our support, we got you. If you think you got it on your own, but you just need some guidance on what to say and what to look for, we got you. I hope this conversation was helpful for you, and I look forward to talking to you again next month. Bye.